Effective immediately, Terrence Calloway is no longer part of Calloway Construction Group.
Renee, Terrence, what happened?
Fire every one of them.
Understood, sir. I'm already moving.
Start keeping records. Everything. Real invoices, real timesheets, backed up in 2 places.
How far back?
As far as it takes.
You were never the brains of this operation, sweetheart. You were just the muscle.
You call it family, but you're trying to take my mother's house.
Before we vote on anything, I think everyone should see a few documents.
Everything on that screen is accurate.
Keep watching the story and follow Mr. Marcus Stories for more powerful moments.
Effective immediately, Terrence Calloway is no longer part of Calloway Construction Group. Mr. Calloway, do you have any comment? Fire every one of them. Understood, sir. I'm already moving. Nobody standing in that crowd under the gray Atlanta sky knew what had actually been happening for the last 14 months. A quiet counterstrike had been building in total silence, one invoice at a time, one late night at a time. In 6 hours, an entire family would learn exactly what they had lost, and exactly who had been holding the real power the whole time. My name is Terrence Calloway. I am 45 years old, and until 8 months ago, I believed something simple. If you build a thing with your own 2 hands, nobody can take it from you. I was wrong about the taking part. I was right about everything else. It was 10:40 Sears, 10:47 on a Tuesday morning in October when I stood on the granite steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. Rain falling soft and steady, holding a manila folder that contained my own divorce decree. My wife stood 12 feet away, smiling for a camera crew I had never invited. Her mother stood beside her, gripping an umbrella the way a queen grips a scepter. I noticed something small that morning, the kind of detail a man files away without understanding why. My wife's mother's knuckles were pale where she held that umbrella handle. That was not the grip of a woman celebrating a victory. That was the grip of someone holding on to something for dear life. I want to tell you what I did not do on those steps, because it matters. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I reached into my jacket pocket and dialed a number I knew by heart, the number of the one person who had stood beside me since this company had a single job trailer and 12 employees. Diane Foster picked up on the second ring. I kept my eyes on my wife the entire time I spoke, so she would see me say it, even if she could not hear the words over the rain. Fire every one of them, I said, low and final. There was a short pause on the line, not surprise, just the quiet of a woman who had been waiting 14 months to hear those exact 4 words. Understood, Diane said. I'm already moving. If you are wondering how a man who was just publicly removed from his own company could turn around and fire the people who removed him, you are asking exactly the right question, because that courthouse scene was never the ending. It was the very last domino in a plan that had been falling into place, quietly, for over a year. Before we get to that reveal, you need to understand who I was before that morning, because it changes everything about what comes after. Let me take you back to 6:30 that same morning, the kind of soft gray Atlanta hour when the fog still sits low over the interstate, and the coffin shops haven't turned their signs around yet. I had been awake since 5, same as I had been for 23 years, ever since I was 19 years old, hauling lumber before sunrise, learning the difference between men who talk about building things and men who actually build them. My son Elijah was still asleep down the hall, 12 years old, all elbows and quiet questions, the kind of kid who watches everything and says almost nothing. I stood in his doorway that morning, just to hear him breathing steady. I did not know yet that, in a few hours, a judge would paper ending my marriage, and that my own company, the one I had built from nothing into Calloway Construction Group, a firm that had put up apartments in the West End and rebuilt 3 blocks along the Beltline, would no longer carry my name at the top of the letterhead. I do not raise my voice. I never have. My father used to say a man who has to yell to be heard hasn't earned the room yet. I earned mine slowly, one contract and one sleepless night at a time, until by the time I was 38, Callaway Construction Group had 41 employees and a name in this city that meant something. Vivian Marsh, my wife's mother, brought sweet potato pie to our house the first Sunday she met me and told everyone at that table I was exactly the kind of steady man her daughter needed. I believed her. That was not my mistake. My mistake was thinking steady meant safe. 7 years earlier, the company had nearly collapsed. A financing deal on the West End project fell apart 3 weeks before we were supposed to break ground, and I had two choices: walk away from 4 years of work, or find money nobody knew I had. My father had left me 40 acres outside Newnan, Georgia, land that had been in our family since 1961, back when a black man buying 40 acres in Coweta County was its own quiet act of defiance. I sold 23 of those acres without telling a soul. I told my wife the capital had come from an outside investor, and I let her believe it, because I did not want her to ever see me as a man who needed saving. That land is gone now. My father's land. I have never told anyone that until this moment, and I am only telling you because you need to understand something about me before this story really begins. I have spent most of my adult life protecting people from having to watch me struggle. I thought that was strength. Some days I am still deciding whether it was strength or just a different kind of silence. So, there I stood on those courthouse steps in a gray suit that used to belong to a company I had poured half my life into, listening to my wife tell a small crowd of reporters and two of my own former employees, "Nee." Effective immediately, Terrence Callaway is no longer part of Callaway Construction Group. The company needs fresh leadership aligned with our new direction. She had replaced me with her cousin, a 27-year-old with sunglasses on indoors, and no construction experience beyond a 6-week internship. He quit halfway through. I did not argue. I did not even look at her for very long. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone, and called the one person who had seen the real ledgers, the real sacrifices, and the real cost of keeping this family's business standing. Now let's go back 6 years before any of this began to unravel, because you need to see how patient this family was, and how patient I had to become in order to match them. It was a Sunday afternoon in Adair Park, the kind of fall day where the maple trees along the street finally start turning the color of a sunset. Vivian Marsh showed up at our door unannounced, holding a foil-wrapped pan of sweet potato pie, still warm, always warm, like she had timed the drive specifically so it would be. "I made too much again," she said. The same thing she always said, though anyone with sense could see one pan doesn't feed 6 people. She sat at my kitchen table, complimented my coffee, asked about Elijah's football season, and then, almost as an afterthought, mentioned that her nephew Andre was between opportunities and wondered if there might be a place for him at Callaway Construction Group. "Nothing big," she said, "just somewhere he could learn." I told her I would think about it. I meant it as a polite no. My wife Renee heard the exchange from the hallway and came in already halfway to yes. "Family looks out for family. Terrence," she said, resting a hand on my shoulder like that settled it. "You know how hard it is for young black men to get a real shot in this industry." She was not wrong about that part. That is what made it so hard to say no. Andre started in procurement 3 weeks later. I want to be clear about something. I have never had a problem giving people chances. I have hired men just out of prison, high school dropouts, guys twice my age, starting over after a layoff. What I had a problem with was Moses, watching invoices come through procurement that did not match the vendors we had used for 15 years. Small at first, a few $1,000s here, routed through a supply company I had never heard of, easy to miss if you were not looking. I was looking. I did not say anything. Not yet. I have learned that the moment you speak too early, people simply get better at hiding. 14 months before that rainy morning at the courthouse, I sat alone in my office, on a Friday night, long after everyone had gone, going through quarterly reports with a red pen and a cup of coffee gone cold. 3 consulting invoices totaling $41,217. 83 did not reconcile against any actual work product. I traced the shell company back through 2 filings to an LLC registered at Vivian Marsh's home address. I remember exactly what that felt like. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter and heavier, like watching a slow leak in a roof you spent years building. The basic decency of 19. I called Diane into my office that night. She had worked for me since the company had 1 job trailer and 12 people on the payroll, and more than that, she was the only person besides my late mother who ever really understood what this business had cost me. I need you to start keeping records, I told her quietly. Real timesheets, real invoices, everything dated and backed up in 2 places. She did not ask why. She just nodded and asked how far back I wanted her to go. As far as it takes, I said. What Diane and I built over the next year was not revenge. Not at first. It was documentation. A blue notebook kept off the company servers, cross-referencing every inflated invoice against real vendor pricing. Copies of internal emails, some recovered after being deleted. Showing conversations between my wife and her cousin about restructuring once the divorce settled. A folder 4 inches thick, sitting quietly in a fireproof lockbox in a storage unit off Metropolitan Parkway that nobody in that family knew existed. There is a particular kind of loneliness in preparing for a war nobody else knows is happening. I want to tell you about one night in that period because I think about it more than almost anything else from that year. 4 years before any of this, before I had even noticed anything was wrong, the company hit a cash crunch on a project that would have 50 of our people out of work if it had collapsed. I quietly took out a second mortgage against the Adair Park house, my mother's house, the only thing of hers I had left, and used it to bridge the gap until the next draw came through. That same week, my wife was in Charlotte at a gala thrown by her mother's business circle, being celebrated as one of Atlanta's rising black women reshaping the skyline. I sat home, with Elijah eating leftover spaghetti, watching the mortgage papers dry on the kitchen counter myself. I would tell her eventually. I never found the right moment. Maybe. I never, for one. Liesl looked for one. I think part of me already knew, even then, that the version of our marriage where I was allowed to be tired, allowed to need help, allowed to be anything other than steady, that version did not exist anymore. So I stopped offering that version of myself up for judgment. I just kept building, and I kept quiet. 10 months before the courthouse, things accelerated. I found a signed strategic partnership agreement with an outside investment group, a document promising to sell a controlling share of the company using a power of attorney with my signature on it. My signature, one I had never signed. There was something else I found that same week, tucked in a drawer in the home office we used to share. A rubber stamp bearing an exact replica of my signature, the kind used for high-volume paperwork. I had not ordered it. I never learned who had. That stamp, I would later find out, appeared on 3 documents I had never seen, months before I even knew to go looking. I sat with that piece of paper for a long time. Forgery is not a small word. It is not a misunderstanding you talk through over dinner. It is a decision somebody made deliberately, believing I would never look closely enough to catch it. That night, I drove out to Piedmont Park, parked near the lake, and sat there until almost 1 in the morning. I thought about my son sleeping at home. I thought about my father's land, half of it already gone. I thought about my mother's house, the one with the porch swing that has creaked the same way since before I was born, and how easily someone could decide to sell it out from under me. I whispered a promise to no one in particular that night, one that had nothing to do with buildings or contracts. Whatever I had sacrificed to keep this family standing, I was not going to let them walk away with it like it had been theirs to spend all along. Every day after that felt different. Another invoice, another email thread, another quiet confirmation that this had never really been about family. It had been about access, and I had given them all of it freely, because I believed the word family meant something to people who used it as often as Vivian Marsh did. I was about to find out exactly how far they were willing to go, and exactly how much I still had not discovered. See here. Stay with me here, heart. Is this the confrontation that changed how I understood my own marriage? And I think you will recognize a piece of yourself in it. 2 days after the courthouse, with rain coming down steady over the West End, Vivian Marsh showed up at my front door carrying a foil pan of sweet potato pie, same as always, and an apology I had not asked for. I want to pause and be straight with you about something important first. My wife's announcement on those courthouse steps had been made in front of cameras, but it had never gone through the board. She had the title of chief executive, not the unilateral authority to remove a sitting chairman without a vote. I had spent the 2 days, after that quietly, confirming exactly that with the company's outside counsel, not reacting, just making sure the ground I was about to stand on was solid. I almost did not answer the door that Thursday evening. I am glad I did, because what happened in the next 20 minutes told me more than 14 months of invoices ever could. Vivian stood on my porch, her umbrella dripping onto the mat, and said, "Terrence, baby, I know things have been hard. I'm not here to fight. I just need you to reactivate the operating accounts before the end of the month. There's a loan coming due, collateralized, against revenue from a few of the consulting entities. If those accounts stay frozen, it's going to be a real problem for everybody." Standing there in the rain, I realized my wife had almost certainly known about this visit before her mother ever knocked. Nothing in that family moved without her signing off on it first. Not anymore, and maybe not ever. I let her keep talking. That is a skill, letting someone keep talking. People reveal more in the silence they think means you are softening than they ever do when you are pushing them. Once this settles, she went on, Renee is going to liquidate some of the company's holdings, and everybody walks away clean. It doesn't have to be ugly, Terrence. We're still family. Then she said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life, delivered with a small laugh, like she was letting me in on a joke I should have already understood. "You were never the brains of this operation, sweetheart. You were just the muscle. Somebody had to hold the hammer while smarter people held the plans." I understood, standing there, that Vivian was not really asking me for money. She was asking me to stay small. A woman who was wed at 29, raising 2 kids alone on a hospital cafeteria worker's salary, learns early that control is the only insurance policy nobody can repossess. Calling me the muscle was not cruelty for its own sake. It was fear wearing the mask of confidence, the same fear that had been driving every invoice, every forged signature, every warm pan of pie pressed into my hands like a peace offering that was never really about peace. I did not raise my voice. I reached into my jacket pocket and turned on a small recorder Diane had given me weeks earlier, tucked flat against my chest. You call it family, I said quietly. But you're trying to take my mother's house. Vivian's face changed, just slightly, just enough. Nobody's taking anything that isn't already halfway gone, Terrence. You signed papers. You made choices. I signed a mortgage to save this company, I said. I never signed away my mother's house to a stranger's investment fund. She did not answer that. She picked her umbrella back up, told me to think it over, and walked back to her car, leaving the pie untouched on my porch table, going cold in the rain. 3 days later, 5 days after the courthouse, I called an emergency meeting of the board. Not to fight, to finish what 14 months of quiet work had prepared me for. The boardroom on the 12th floor of our offices near Cascade Road has floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. That morning the sky was gray and low, rain streaking the glass, and the room felt colder than the thermostat could account for. Renee sat at the head of the table, in a cream-colored suit, jaw tight, phone gripped in one hand. Vivian sat beside her, that same practiced warmth pulled tight over something closer to fear. Andre lounged 2 seats down, sunglasses pushed up on his head, still wearing the confidence of a man who believed this meeting would go exactly the way the courthouse announcement had. I walked in 5 minutes late. I did not sit in the chairman's seat. Renee had already given that to Andre, though the board had never voted on it. I stood at the back of the room instead, with Diane beside me holding a thin folder and a flash drive. Renee started the meeting the way she had clearly rehearsed it. Today we'll be formalizing the leadership transition and finalizing the removal of legacy roles that no longer align with the company's direction. Before we vote on anything, I said, my voice even, carrying easily in that quiet room, I think everyone should see a few documents. Diane plugged in the drive. The screen filled with real-time sheets from our field crews, laid side by side against official payroll records that had been quietly padded for 2 years through Vivian's shell entities. Then came the inflated invoices, dozens of them, all traceable to addresses connected to the Marsh family. Then deleted emails. Diane had recovered conversations between Renee and Andre from 8 months earlier discussing timelines for phasing me out following the divorce filing. Then the document that made the room go completely silent. A scanned copy of the second mortgage on the Adair Park house, dated 4 years earlier, my own real signature at the bottom, next to a second document, a proposed sale of that same property to an outside buyer, my signature forged onto a power of attorney I had never authorized. I looked directly at Renee. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. That house belonged to my mother, I said. I mortgaged it 4 years ago to save this company, the same week you were in Charlotte at your family's gala. I never told you because I did not want you to see me as someone who needed help. Now you're trying to sell it without my signature on the actual sale. For the first time since I had known her, Renee had nothing to say. Then Walter Higgins, our company's accountant, a man Renee had trusted completely, a man I had quietly asked to help Diane and me 2 years earlier, stood up on his own. Everything on that screen is accurate, he said, his voice steady despite the tremble in his hands. I've been documenting the discrepancies since Mr. Calloway first asked me to look into the procurement irregularities. It's all here. This is the part of the story where 3 of my own employees stood up in that room, one after another, and told the board exactly what this family's version of leadership had actually cost them. Patricia Owens, our senior bookkeeper of in years, spoke first. She said she had been passed over for a promotion 3 separate times, her hours quietly cut whenever budget adjustments needed to happen under Renee's leadership, while less qualified relatives were brought in above her. Then Marcus Webb, a field supervisor with 9 years at the company, said he had been paid $2.40 below scale for the last 3 years running, a gap nobody in finance had ever bothered to correct. Then Ray Sutton, another supervisor, said almost the same thing had happened to him, and that when he raised it with Andre directly, he was told to be grateful he had a job at all. Nobody in that room said a word while the three of them spoke. That silence had weight to it. It pressed against your chest. Vivian's composure cracked in a way I had never seen. Terrence, we can fix this quietly. We can still. You had 14 months to fix it quietly, I said. You chose to remove me on courthouse steps, in front of cameras instead. Watch what happens next, because this was not the moment I got angry. This was the moment I finally let the truth speak for itself. The board did not need long to deliberate. 11 minutes by my watch, 11 minutes to unwind 14 months of quiet infiltration. The vote was nearly unanimous. Andre was removed from his position immediately, along with 2 other Marsh family hires who had been placed in finance and procurement over the preceding 2 years. Renee was stripped of her chief executive title, effective that afternoon, pending a full internal audit and consultation with outside counsel regarding the forged power of attorney. I was reinstated as chairman, a position I had never legitimately lost, since the board had never actually voted to remove me. My majority ownership stake, structured years earlier specifically to prevent exactly this kind of takeover, meant the outcome was never really in question once the truth was on the table. Renee and Vivian were asked to vacate the building within 24 hours. I want to tell you what that moment actually felt like, because it was not what you would expect. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired, the specific tiredness that comes after carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally setting it down. I walked to the window and looked out over the wet street below. Behind me, I heard Vivian's composure finally break completely, not into anger, but into something quieter and sadder, a kind of muttering to herself. All of this over a few contracts. A few contracts, as if the scale of what she had tried to take could somehow be minimized by saying it's small enough. Diane stepped up beside me at the window, careful to keep some distance, the way she always did. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm okay," I said. "Just tired. Tired from a lot of years of staying quiet. I need to pause here and tell you about something that happened 3 years before this boardroom, because I think it matters for understanding why that few contracts line cut as deep as it did. There was a season, back then when the company was scaling fast, and I was working 18-hour days just to keep the wheels on. Elijah was 9. He had a school play, a small production about the water cycle, the kind of thing that feels enormous when you are 9 and forgettable when you are an adult, except it is never actually forgettable. I told myself I would catch the second half after wrapping up a site inspection. The inspection ran long. I got to the school gymnasium just as the lights came up, and parents were filing out, holding grocery store bouquets. Elijah was standing by the stage in his cardboard rain cloud costume, scanning the crowd, and I watched his face do the thing kids' faces do when they are trying very hard not to look disappointed in front of their friends. I never told him how much that moment cost me. I just carried it, quietly and alone, filed next to every other Sunday I had worked instead of resting. By early evening, the transition was already moving. Security escorted Andre out with a single box of belongings, mostly sneakers he kept under his desk. He did not say a word. On his way out, just adjusted his sunglasses, even though the sun had long since gone behind the clouds. Renee stopped at the elevator bank, and for a moment I thought she might turn around. She did not. The doors closed on her reflection in the polished steel, a woman I had built a life with, standing very small in a very large lobby she used to walk through like she owned every inch of it. Vivian lingered longest, gathering a few things from a desk drawer she had claimed as her own over the past 2 years. Watching her move slower than any toward the door, I thought unwillingly about the fact that she had been widowed at 29, raising 2 kids alone on a hospital cafeteria worker's income, and had sworn her family would never again depend on anyone else's mercy. It did not excuse what she had done, but it helped me understand the hunger behind it, and that understanding made it easier to let her go without hating her for it. That night, I drove home to Adair Park instead of my downtown apartment. I sat on the porch, the one my grandfather built board by board, and let myself feel something I had not allowed in 14 months. Relief, thin and quiet, settling over me like the evening air. The morning after the vote, I sat alone in the chairman's office, my office again, with the city waking up slow through the window. On the desk sat the signed transfer of control, the ink barely dry, the culmination of 14 months I had carried mostly by myself. Diane knocked once and let herself in, setting down black coffee and a thin folder without a word. They finished moving out, she said. Andre, the 2 others. Vivian called this morning. She wants to see you one last time. I thought about it for exactly as long as it took to drink 1 sip of coffee. No, I said. I don't need to see her again. I just need them gone. Diane told me later that she had watched Vivian leave the building for the last time that afternoon from the lobby window while wrapping up final paperwork. Vivian walked out carrying that same pan pie, still uneaten, the foil starting to curl at the edges. She stood under the awning a long moment, looking up at the company sign, the one she used to point out to friends at church, telling them proudly, "That's my daughter's company." Then she turned and got into the back of a modest sedan, nothing like the town cars that used to be arranged for her through Renee's office. Diane said Vivian did not look back once. That evening, I drove out to Adair Park earlier than usual. Elijah was sitting on the front steps waiting for me, backpack still on. Pop, he said, the name he'd taken to calling me a few years back. Is Mom okay? I thought carefully before I answered. Because he deserved the truth, but he also deserved a truth he could carry at 12 years old. Your mom's going to be okay, I said. She's got some things to work through, but she's going to be okay. From here on out, your mom and I are going to live in 2 different places. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you still have both of us fully in your life. He nodded slowly. The way kids do when they are absorbing something bigger than they can fully name yet. In the days that followed, I focused on repair rather than wreckage. I signed the formal legal terminations for every member of the Marsh family who had been placed inside the company, documented, clean, defensible, in any court in Georgia. But I also went the other direction. I moved Patricia Owens into the senior role she had earned 3 times over. I corrected Marcus Webb's and Ray Sutton's pay retroactively, plus back pay, covering the last 3 years. There was no press conference, no public statement calling anyone out by name. I had Diane draft a short professional release for local business outlets. Callaway Construction Group reaffirms its commitment to transparency and fair leadership, following an internal governance review. That was all it needed to say. The people who mattered already knew the truth. The people who didn't need a spectacle. Real justice rarely looks like the movies. It doesn't come with a courtroom gasp or a dramatic reveal set to swelling music. Sometimes, it just looks like paperwork done correctly, and people who lied finally having to live with what the truth costs. 3 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in Piedmont Park, I laid out an old checkered blanket under a stand of oak trees near the lake. Elijah ran off almost immediately to play fetch with a neighbor's dog, laughing in that unrestrained way that only kids and people who have truly relaxed can laugh. Diane sat across from me on the blanket, unpacking a container of salad and a jar of homemade lemonade. I watched my son chase that dog across the grass for a while, before I said what I had been meaning to say for weeks. Thank you, I told her. Not just for the last 14 months, for being here today. She smiled and said, "You don't need to thank me. I just did what a loyal assistant should do, and I hope what a friend does." A little later, Elijah flopped down on the blanket beside me out of breath, grass stains already working into his knees. "Pop," he said, "how come you're not mad at Mom? How come you never talk bad about her to me?" I had thought about to answer that question for a long time before he ever asked it. "Because being angry doesn't build anything, son," I said. I was angry for a while. I was hurt for longer than I probably let myself admit. But if I spent all my energy hating your mom, I wouldn't have had anything left over to love you, or to rebuild the company, or to keep the promise I made about this land. So I chose something different. I chose to protect what mattered by staying quiet, gathering what was true and acting only when it actually counted. He nodded slowly, the way he does when something is settling into him for keeps. "That sounds like it was hard," he said. "It was," I told him. "It still is some days, but it's a lot easier than carrying hate around for the rest of your life." That evening, after Diane and Elijah had both headed home, I stood alone on the porch of the Adair Park house as stars dropped low over the skyline, gold light settling across the yard the same way it had settled there my whole childhood. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was simply present, and that, it turned out, was its own kind of arrival. This story reminds us that legacy was never about the size of a company or the number on a settlement. It is the version of yourself you can still recognize once everyone who claimed to love you has finished telling you who to be instead. If someone in your own family ever uses the word family to ask for something that costs you more than it costs them, don't answer that same day. Write it on an index card. Sleep on it. Read it back once, out loud, before your coffee the next morning. If it still sounds like love in daylight, say yes. If it sounds like a bill wearing love's clothing, say no, kindly, plainly, and only once. That is not coldness. That is the same quiet arithmetic that kept Terence Calloway's mother's house safe. Board vote by board vote, invoice by invoice, silence by silence. Disclaimer: if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you most, or if you've ever watched a single father or a single mother get treated as less than because of where they came from or what they looked like, tell me in the comments below. 1. If you think Terrence's 14 months of silence was wisdom. Or 2. If you think it let things go too far before he acted. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe. Because next week, we're telling another true-to-life story about a family who underestimated the wrong person, one time too many. This story is a work of dramatized fiction inspired by real patterns of workplace and family betrayal. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is coincidental. Names, companies, and locations have been changed or invented for storytelling purposes. AI tools were used only to assist with pacing and clarity. The narrative, characters, and lessons were shaped by human creative direction.